The storm arrived before nightfall, rolling over the valley like a white beast with teeth made of ice. Wind clawed at the earth, tearing snow from the ground and hurling it against fences, barns, and the wide wooden house that stood alone at the edge of the ranch. The sky had disappeared hours ago, swallowed by a churning ceiling of gray. By dusk, the world beyond a few feet was nothing but a blur of white fury. Inside the ranch house, warmth lived, but only barely. The 35-year-old rancher stood near the front window, watching the storm erase the land he had spent years building. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and steady, the kind shaped by hard seasons and harder lessons. Wealth had come to him through relentless labor, wise trades, and long days under a merciless sun. His cattle numbered in the hundreds. His barns were strong. His name carried respect across the valley. Yet none of it touched the hollow quiet that filled his home. The house was large, built with intention and pride, its beams thick and its hearth carved from river stone. But it echoed. The dining table seated 8 and had not been filled in years. The piano near the staircase had not been opened since the day grief sealed it shut. He had long ago mastered the discipline of silence, of waking before dawn, working until exhaustion, and returning only to sleep. He told himself he preferred it that way. Outside, the wind roared louder, shaking the shutters. Snow lashed against the glass in furious waves. He moved from window to fireplace, feeding another log into the flames. Sparks leapt upward, briefly brightening the room. The firelight cast shadows across his face, revealing eyes that had once known laughter and had since learned restraint. Storms did not frighten him. He had survived worse. But something about this one felt different, restless, searching. Miles away from the nearest town, the ranch sat exposed to the open plains. Travelers rarely passed this way in winter. No one would be foolish enough to wander tonight. No one except someone desperate. Across the valley, barely visible between walls of spinning snow, a figure staggered forward. The 25-year-old woman could no longer feel her fingers. Her thin coat, once respectable, was now soaked and stiff with ice. Each step demanded more strength than she had left. Snow gathered in her hair and clung to her lashes, freezing each blink. She had not meant to be out so late. The road had vanished hours ago, swallowed by drifts. Her small bag had been lost somewhere behind her when the wind ripped it from her shoulder. Pride had kept her moving at first. Fear kept her moving now. She had left something behind that she could never return to. A place where kindness was scarce and promises were broken like dry twigs. The details burned too sharply to linger on. All that mattered was forward, away, anywhere but back. When she first saw the faint glow through the storm, she thought it a trick of her fading vision. But the light remained. A house. Hope surged painfully through her chest. She adjusted her course, fighting against wind that pushed her sideways. More than once she fell to her knees, snow swallowing her hands as she tried to rise again. Her breath came shallow and ragged. The cold had crept deep into her bones, whispering dangerous promises of rest. Just a little farther. The rancher heard it at first as part of the storm, a dull, irregular thud against the door. He paused, listening. The wind screamed down the chimney. The house groaned. Then it came again. Knock. Not loud, not strong, but deliberate. His body stiffened. Visitors did not arrive unannounced, especially not in weather like this. He crossed the room slowly, each step measured. Near the door, a rifle rested mounted on the wall. He took it down, not out of fear, but habit. Another knock. Weaker this time. He unlatched the door, but did not open it fully. Wind immediately forced its way through the crack, snow scattering across the wooden floor. Through the narrow opening, he saw only white chaos. Then he lowered his gaze. She stood there, if standing was the right word, a fragile silhouette swaying in the storm. Her lips were pale, her skin flushed with cold. Snow coated her shoulders like a burial shroud. Her eyes, wide and glassy, lifted to meet his. For a suspended second, neither moved. He had expected danger. Bandits. Drifters seeking trouble. What he saw instead was a woman barely holding herself upright. "Please," she tried to say, though the word fractured in the wind. Suspicion flared instinctively. Who was she? Why here? Trouble followed the unplanned and the unknown. But conscience spoke louder. If he closed the door now, she would not make it to morning. The rifle felt heavy in his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered it. He opened the door wider. The wind surged between them like a final test. She stumbled forward, collapsing just past the threshold as her strength surrendered completely. He caught her before she struck the floor. She was lighter than he expected, frighteningly light. With one swift motion, he shut the door against the storm and slid the bolt into place. The house fell back into muffled silence, though the wind still howled outside in frustration. He carried her toward the fire, kneeling to pull frozen gloves from her stiff fingers. Her skin was icy to the touch. Too cold. Stay with me, he muttered, though he wasn't sure she could hear. He draped thick wool blankets around her shoulders and moved quickly to fetch dry clothing from a cedar chest long unopened. The faint scent of lavender escaped as he lifted the lid, a memory he had carefully avoided for years. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he brought the garments anyway. When he returned, her eyes fluttered open. Confusion crossed her face as warmth brushed her skin. "You're safe," he said gruffly, the words unfamiliar in his mouth. Outside, the storm battered the walls in fury. Inside, by the stubborn glow of firelight, a fragile stranger breathed beneath his roof. And though neither of them knew it yet, the night had already begun to change everything. The storm did not loosen its grip. Wind pressed against the ranch house as if determined to force its way inside, rattling shutters and sighing down the chimney in long, hollow moans. Snow struck the windows in relentless bursts, erasing the world beyond the glass. The house had become an island in a white sea. She sat wrapped in thick wool blankets near the fire, her damp hair now loose around her shoulders, slowly drying in the warmth. The borrowed clothes hung slightly large on her slender frame, the fabric soft with years and memory. Color had begun to return to her cheeks, though exhaustion still traced shadows beneath her eyes. The rancher stood a few paces away, watching without appearing to watch. "You should drink this," he said, handing her a tin cup of warm broth. His voice was steady but not unkind. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered. 2 simple words. No expectation. No demand. He nodded once and moved toward the small wooden table, giving her space. He was not accustomed to company. The rhythm of his life was precise. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Conversation had become something he performed only when necessary. Yet the house felt different tonight. Less hollow. The fire snapped sharply, breaking the silence. "I didn't think anyone lived this far out," she said after a moment, her voice still thin but steadier. "Most don't," he replied. A flicker of something, almost humor, touched her lips. "I suppose I'm fortunate you do." Fortunate. The words settled strangely in the air between them. He studied her more directly now. Despite the strain etched into her features, there was a quiet dignity about her posture. She did not beg. She did not dramatize. She simply existed, fragile. Yes, but not defeated. "You were headed somewhere," he said. Not a question. She lowered her gaze to the steaming cup in her hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside. "Away," she answered softly. He did not press. He understood the weight of that single word. The lantern on the wall flickered as the wind surged again. The room dimmed briefly before steadying. Shadows stretched and contracted along the walls like restless ghosts. "I won't be any trouble," she added quickly, as if fearing she had already overstayed. "By morning, I'll continue on." Morning. He had not considered it beyond the storm breaking. "You won't be going anywhere by morning," he said. "Not if the roads are buried." A trace of uncertainty crossed her face. Dependence was not something she wore easily. "I've managed before." He believed that. Whatever she had fled had not broken her entirely. He pulled out a chair opposite her and sat for the first time since she'd arrived. The movement felt symbolic, though he did not analyze why. "You shouldn't have been out in weather like this," he said. "I didn't know it would turn so quickly," she replied. Then, after a pause, "Sometimes staying is worse." The words landed heavier than she likely intended. He leaned back slightly, studying the fire. Sometimes leaving costs more. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just honest. She glanced around the large room, the high beams, the sturdy furniture, the emptiness. Her gaze rested briefly on a framed photograph above the mantel. Even in the dim light, it was clear the image had once been cherished. "Is she your wife?" she asked gently. The question could have hardened him. Once it would have. Instead, he exhaled slowly. She was. No further explanation came, yet grief lingered unmistakably in his tone. "I'm sorry," she said, and the sincerity in her voice made the words feel less like obligation and more like understanding. He hadn't spoken of his loss in years. People in town knew the story in fragments, but he avoided detail, avoided memory. Work had been easier than mourning. "It was winter," he said before he could stop himself. "A storm not unlike this one." Her fingers tightened around the cup. She didn't interrupt. "I thought I had time," he continued quietly. "Time fixes most things. That's what I believed." The fire cracked loudly, as if objecting. "And it didn't?" she asked. "No." The simplicity of the answer held more truth than explanation ever could. Outside, the wind began to change its tone, less violent, though still insistent. She set the empty cup aside. "I once believed time would soften certain people," she admitted. "I stayed longer than I should have because of it." He met her eyes. There it was, the shared understanding neither needed to fully explain. "Did you lose someone?" he asked. "In a way," she said. "I lost the version of myself that believed words." He absorbed that. The storm had not been the only thing threatening her life tonight. The firelight illuminated the faint bruise along her wrist, half hidden beneath the sleeve. His jaw tightened, but he did not comment. Some truths required no interrogation. "You're safe here," he said instead. The words carried more weight this time. Her gaze softened. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Something shifted then, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. The room felt warmer, though the fire had not grown. A sudden crash echoed from outside, startling them both. Perhaps a branch torn loose, or a section of fence surrendering. Instinctively, she flinched. Without thinking, he stood and crossed the space between them. "It's just the storm," he assured. She nodded, but her breathing quickened. The cold had weakened her more than either realized. As she rose slightly, her knees buckled. He caught her again. This time she did not collapse entirely, but her balance faltered long enough for his hands to steady her waist. The contact was brief, yet electric in its unexpected intimacy. Her pulse fluttered wildly beneath his fingertips. "You're still freezing," he murmured. "I'm fine." "You're not." He guided her back to the chair and pulled another blanket from the couch, draping it around her shoulders with careful restraint. His knuckles brushed her hair, and for a fleeting second, he did not pull away. Neither did she. The storm's howl softened gradually, its fury spent. "I used to think my heart was buried for good," he admitted quietly, surprising himself again. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, at the fragile strength, the quiet resilience, the warmth returning to her eyes. "Now I'm not so certain." Tears did not fall, but something fragile passed between them. "I don't know where I belong," she confessed. "I only know I can't go back." He understood that more deeply than he wished. The lantern burned lower. The fire settled into glowing embers. "You can rest in the guest room," he said gently. "No one will harm you here." She hesitated before standing, steadier this time. At the doorway to the hall, she paused. "Thank you," she said again, but this time the words carried something more than gratitude. When her door closed softly behind her, the house did not feel invaded. It felt alive. And for the first time in years, he did not dread the coming of morning. Morning arrived quietly. After a night of fury, the storm retreated without ceremony, leaving behind a world remade in white. Sunlight spilled across the valley in slow golden ribbons, catching on drifts of snow and turning them into fields of diamonds. The wind had stilled. Even the cattle, faint shapes in the distance, stood calm against the glittering horizon. Inside the ranch house, warmth lingered in the air. The rancher had risen before dawn out of habit, though he had slept little. He stood near the window now, mug of coffee cooling in his hand, watching light stretch over land that no longer looked hostile. For years, mornings had felt like repetition, another day to endure. Today felt uncertain in a different way, alive. Behind him, a door creaked softly open. She stepped into the hallway, hesitant, as though unsure of her place in daylight. The borrowed clothes still hung gently on her frame, and her hair, now dry, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. In the pale glow of morning, she looked less like a survivor of a storm and more like someone reborn from it. For a moment, neither spoke. "You should see this," he said finally, his voice low but steady. She moved to stand beside him at the window. When she looked out, her breath caught, not from cold this time, but from wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The valley lay silent and untouched, as if the storm had erased every mistake of the night before. "Storms don't last forever," he said. She glanced at him, sensing the meaning beneath the words. "No," she agreed softly. "They just make us believe they will." They stood shoulder to shoulder, close but not touching, sharing the fragile peace that comes only after survival. Reality returned slowly. "I should go," she said after a long silence, though the words sounded as if they cost her something. "The roads will clear by afternoon. I don't want to impose longer than I already have." Impose. The word unsettled him. "You nearly froze to death," he replied. "That's hardly an imposition." A faint smile touched her lips. Still, she stepped away from the window and began folding the borrowed blanket neatly over the back of a chair, as though determined to leave no trace of herself behind. The small gesture struck him harder than he expected. The house had been silent for so long that even the sound of her footsteps had begun to feel necessary. He watched her gather herself, watched the careful composure she wore like armor. "You don't have to rush," he said. "I've been rushing my whole life," she answered lightly, though sadness flickered beneath the surface. She moved toward the front door, pausing briefly as her hand hovered near the handle. The bright snow outside reflected through the glass, casting her silhouette in silver light. If she walked through that door, the silence would return. The table would seat 8 and remain empty. The piano would stay closed. The fire would burn without laughter to soften it. He felt it then, not fear, but clarity. Wait. The word escaped him before doubt could silence it. She turned slowly. He crossed the room in deliberate steps, stopping a few feet from her. For a man who had faced drought, debt, and death without flinching, speaking now required unexpected courage. "When you knocked on my door last night," he began, "I thought you were trouble." A flicker of amusement warmed her eyes. "I suppose I looked it. You looked like someone the storm was trying to take." His voice softened. "And I nearly let it. But you didn't." "No," he held her gaze. "And I'm grateful for that." Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of unspoken truths. "You changed something," he continued, the admission steady but vulnerable. "I convinced myself long ago that my life was meant to be endured, not shared. That grief was permanent." He exhaled slowly. "Last night proved me wrong." Her composure wavered. It was only one night. One night can change everything. She searched his face, perhaps looking for hesitation. She found none. "I don't have anywhere certain to go," she admitted. "But uncertainty doesn't mean I belong here." "Belonging isn't about certainty," he replied. "It's about choice." The wind outside remained still, as if the world itself waited. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small brass key. It was worn from years of use, simple and unadorned. "This house has had too much silence," he said quietly. "If you choose to stay, even for a while, it won't be charity. It won't be obligation. It will be because we both deserve something better than surviving alone." Her eyes filled, though tears did not fall. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know you walked through a storm rather than stay where you were breaking." His voice held quiet conviction. "That's enough." Emotion rose between them, fragile and undeniable. She looked down at the key resting in his open palm. Taking it would mean risk, trust, hope. All things she had nearly surrendered. "And if I leave?" she asked softly. "Then I'll be grateful I opened the door," he said. "Because for one night, this house felt alive again." The honesty in his words stripped away the last of her doubt. Slowly, deliberately, she reached forward and closed her fingers around the key. The metal felt warm, not cold. "I don't want to go back to merely surviving," she said. "Not if there's a chance to live." Relief, pure and unguarded, crossed his face for the first time. He opened the door, and sunlight flooded the room. The air outside was crisp, but no longer cruel. Together, they stepped onto the porch. The valley stretched wide and brilliant before them, untouched except for the path she had carved through the snow the night before, a single set of desperate footprints leading to his door. He descended the steps and extended his hand. After only a breath of hesitation, she placed her hand in his. Side by side, they walked forward into the bright expanse, leaving a new pair of footprints pressed firmly into the fresh snow. The storm had come to destroy. Instead, it had delivered two wounded souls to the same threshold. And beneath the golden morning light, what began as shelter became promise.